And welcome to another episode of Experts Speak. I'm Michael DeLon. Today I'm talking with Scott Ramey. Scott, thank you, sir, for spending some time with me today.
My pleasure, Michael. Thanks for having me. I'm so
You,
excited to be with a fellow Hoosier. This is awesome.
at, absolutely, it's great. I was reading your bio and thinking about basketball and just growing
Uh,
up years, going, wow, I don't. We all need to get together more often.
yeah, I
Um,
agree.
But we're not talking about glorious Indiana. We are talking about really how to speak your way to greater impact.
Mm,
And what we're going to dive into, Scott, we're not talking necessarily about speaking from stage, although it will apply. We're talking about communication and how do we entrepreneurs really communicate in a way that's authentic, that connects with our audience, and that promotes who we are and what we do in a more powerful, personal way to serve more people, to gain more business and things of that nature. So that's kind of the context of where we're going. But Scott, I want to ask, how in the world did you get doing what you're doing today?
yeah, no, I appreciate the question. So, boy, this is a big answer, but I'll try to be as brief as I possibly can. I reference Indiana. I grew up in small town Indiana. And I was fortunate to go right out of college into financial services.
Mm-hmm.
I started with Edward Jones and Company in
Yeah,
Speedway, Indiana, ironically, knocking on doors, going door to door, meeting
yeah,
people.
yeah.
And it was a remarkable way to start. From there, I went into internal sales, external sales, sales leadership, led business development for a global organization at one point, and had numerous roles in the C-suite.
Mm-hmm.
I had the opportunity to leave and exit corporate America, which I chose to do. And I thought about, like, I think you're most uniquely positioned to help the person you once were. And it took me back to this concept that I experienced when I was 19 years old. So I was a pretty good basketball player. I wouldn't say I was Indiana good, but we played Indiana in their holiday classic, and they beat us by, I think, 39 that year. In my
Yeah.
but At Niagara University, but I wasn't able to continue to play. About 18 to 24 months on crutches. I broke my foot, kept breaking it. And so I made the difficult decision to no longer want to participate in sports. So I went to tell the coaching staff. Back then, there wasn't the transfer portal.
Right.
Now it's so easy for kids to leave. Back
Right.
then, coach had to give you permission. I mean, it was a process. You had to sit out a year. And so as I was sharing with them that I was leaving, I full-fledged panic attack.
Mm.
Extraordinary moment. So I had this kid who was super confident, an athlete, multi-sport athlete, first Division I kid, leave Western Boone High School, first Division I athlete, and all of a sudden I felt this incredible sense of vulnerability, and frankly brokenness that I never ever
Wow.
anticipated happening. Now I worked on it aggressively and realized that I needed to figure out what was the cause, and I continued to work on it, anxiety and panic. But as I had an opportunity to leave corporate, and given my success in corporate America, I'm like, well, where am I going to be best suited to help people and serve them? You know, be a mission-driven messenger, make a real impact, because that's what fueled me through my leadership roles.
Yeah.
And I think I really should lean into leadership and communication and sales coaching, and that's what I'm doing now. But it was that moment. But here's the bigger thing, Michael. As I dug into it, I was a history major, bunch of research. I love research. This is a significant problem, especially for entrepreneurs, that 56% of entrepreneurs don't want to self promote themselves in
Yeah.
business building opportunities, networking, other events.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so first of all, I knew I wasn't alone. I've known that for a long time, by the way, but more and
Uh-huh.
more anxiousness is arising in us given the general climate of the US today.
Right.
And so I see this tension mounting for people, and I think it's just getting worse for folks. And
Yeah.
so I hope to be a light to say, hey, it's okay. You're not broken. And there are some tactics and techniques to help you feel really comfortable when you're communicating and when you're selling. And sometimes that's a really difficult word for people to admit that they are
Yeah.
salespeople. I would argue everyone's a salesperson. Um,
Absolutely.
so that's how I got started. And that's what I do now, consulting and coaching.
I love it. I love it, man. There's so much that we can dive into there.
Yeah.
So a couple of things, the brokenness aspect. This morning when
Mm,
I was exercising, I was listening to a John Maxwell audio, and it's Building the Leader Within You 2.0.
mm,
I read Building the Leader Within You back in like 1993, the original. So
yeah.
he's updated. So I've been listening to it. And he mentioned something about brokenness
Mm,
and how important it is that as we experience brokenness or fear that we share it
yeah.
because of what you've experienced. Everybody says, "You've got that, I've got that too," and it connects us. Do you find that? to be true?
Oh, I'm so glad you went down this path because this is precisely what happened just over almost 2.5 years ago. I was sitting in this very office. My wife walks up the stairs. I shared with you before we started recording. I have two daughters. One
Yeah.
happened to be up at DePaul University, and she's a Division I soccer player. The other is a swimmer at Boston University, Division I. These are great, great kids, great athletes. But Michelle walks up the stairs and she's like, "Hey, you need to call Aubrey, our oldest." And by the way, she doesn't mind me sharing this story because it changed both of us. It really did. And so, as I said, well, here's the issue was that she had just did not pass, actually flunked a presentation course that she was taking.
Okay.
She had been benched the weekend prior for making some mistakes on the pitch. And she had just left the sports psychologist's office and they were recommending she consider medication for depression and anxiety. And
Wow.
I'm like, oh my goodness, what can I possibly say to this young woman? And I know as a father what works and what doesn't work with my daughters, even though sometimes I keep going back to the well on things that doesn't work, which is
Yeah.
telling them what to do. It's not a
Oh yeah.
path. And so honestly, Michael, since with I thought like what would I've wanted to hear back when I was a junior at Niagara and contemplating my destiny and real sitting on a outside the chapel on the campus in a freezing cold, crying in my hands.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? I would have wanted to hear that you're not broken. So I called her and I said, look, kiddo, mom says you're having a difficult time. She says, yeah, dad, it's tough. And I shared with her that I too have anxiety. For the first time, I shared the fact that I had anxiety with anyone other than Michelle. No one knew Michael. And to this day,
Yeah.
every time people hear podcasts like the one we're recording, like, you're an executive vice president. You had 1,200 people in your organization. You're responsible for 5 million customers, 245 billion under assets under administration. You had anxiety? And what that moment did for me was it released energy. I could literally feel it leaving my shoulders and the top of my head, which is easy with the bald head.
Yeah.
But what it did for her was it gave her permission to understand that she wasn't alone either, and that this
Right.
isn't a fatal flaw, that it's not something that you have to absolutely obsess about, that there are paths forward to help build your confidence. And so I'll tell you, it empowered me to leave corporate America, frankly, and pursue
Yeah.
my passion. But more importantly, or as importantly, it enables Aubrey to do what she needed to do. And she ended up entering the transfer portal, went to Valparaiso University,
Yeah.
played every minute of every game her senior year, didn't come off the field once, and ended up playing the last 2 months of the year on a stress fracture because she wanted to give everything to her teammates. They won the
Wow.
Missouri Valley Conference tournament. She was all tournament team. They played Notre Dame in the first round of the NCAA tournament at Notre Dame. And now
That's
she's
great.
about to start on Monday, starts a role with a really wonderful organization up in Chicago. So I saw her realize that she wasn't broken. I said, "Hey, bud, why don't you do what really going to fuel you?" And so it's
Yeah.
just been, and honestly, it's not a week that goes by I don't open up LinkedIn and somebody's messaged me, "Thank you for having the courage to share your story," because as men, especially,
Yeah.
we're not particularly vulnerable.
Right. We're
We've got to
not.
be that rock. And I felt like, through a lot of work, I'm like, hey, it's okay to be the rock. And it's okay to say you also need to be vulnerable and share what's really happening in your life. Because if you do, it releases you and it's going to help somebody else.
Absolutely. Dude, that is like I want to take my shoes off. This is holy ground, right? It's funny because yeah, men are that stalwart, right? And it took me back to high school days.
Yeah,
Dare I say I'm gonna divert us for just a minute.
that's fine.
But the amazing one hit wonder group, right? I think the Village People,
Oh, yeah.
they came out with YMCA, which made them, but then they came out with the song Macho Man.
Mm, mm.
I want to be. And it's like, I wonder if that didn't just implant something into us to go, that's what I want to be. And macho men can't share themselves. And that is so wrong. Because what happened to you and your daughter is amazing because the impact that one conversation has had will have on her life, the confidence she now has
Yeah.
changes everything.
Well, and me too. Honestly, she gave me as much in that moment as I gave her, and that's like so. Now we have this connection that is it's unbelievable. And
Yeah.
yeah, try not to get choked up in this conversation, but it's just I think and I'm still working on okay, what are the root cause and the traumas associated with that. And I had a great childhood, so but there are things that trigger us that we're not aware of,
Right.
and I think as it pertains to selling, especially like I felt like in my corporate career, people knew me, like my teams knew who I was. And when I went
Right.
in a large, we were towards the end of my career, the last 10 years was a lot of large opportunities, big pitches, committee driven, RFPs, went from knocking on doors, um, meeting with people on their kitchen table to like
Yeah.
large deals. I believe people knew who I was in those situations, which is why we were successful and our teams were successful. But there was still this idea that I had this mask that was covering me for so many years. And when I took that mask off and I became free, then the magnetic attraction, the resonance I had with
Dude.
people became extraordinary, Michael, and it's just
Yeah.
continued. And so, what I would say to people who are struggling, particularly in the sales process, sales cycle, making connections, moving their needle, is that you're probably operating out of scarcity versus
Mm-hmm.
abundance,
Right.
and your perhaps lack of curiosity because you don't want to be quote unquote be exposed
Mm-hmm.
is hurting you, and the
Yeah.
lack of personal connection, especially if you're fearful or concerned or afraid, people feel that.
Yeah.
They feel that. I had a call yesterday with a lovely human being that I've gotten to know very well, who's in a very difficult financial position, and his fear, I have no doubt his fear and his concern and this cloud hanging over him, a real problem, objective solvable problem,
Right.
but a real problem. I have no doubt it's impacting him on a daily basis and his ability to go out and promote himself. No doubt.
Yes. Oh, 100%
Yeah.
without question.
Mm.
Boy, we're gonna dive here. So, um, I'm gonna say a phrase, and I want your feedback.
Sure.
Selling, self promotion, whatever we call this thing, selling is more about being than doing.
I love that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think so many times as business owners, entrepreneurs, we are looking for that next thing to do. That's going to be the magic bullet, the purple pill. And some of them they can work, but if I'm not whole, it's not going to work long term. It's just a band-aid. Is that fair?
I couldn't agree more. It's not mechanical, it's relational, and it's about influence versus manipulation. And when I look at, gosh, I've managed a lot of teams, a lot of people, and I just think of the Pareto's law, 80/20 rule. And I had I'm speaking at the end of April to a group, and they're wonderful people. And I said, "Tell me how many people are on goal, on target in 2024? How many exceeded goal, and how many were behind target? 80% were behind."
Yeah.
So most people in organizations, most people, if they run a small business, if you kind of look at if you do kind of a weighted average versus everybody else, you're going to be behind plan. It's just the numbers, the
Yeah.
statistics would suggest that. And I will tell you, it's because of it's scarcity versus abundance, lack
Yeah.
of personal connection, and lack of general curiosity. But here's the thing I would say most importantly, you got to do the work here first on
Yes.
yourself to understand, why am I fear? Is it irrational fear or rational fear? If it's irrational, it's emotional driven, but
Right.
rational fears there too. Like I don't know my product and service well enough. I don't have the training I need. I mean, those are rational fears that could be
Yeah.
addressed. Objective versus subjective problems. But I've seen it time and time again. I can't tell you, like, my forte is helping underperforming leaders and underperforming organizations. That's what I did my whole career. Like that
Okay.
earlier version of that anxiety ridden self is now that the underperforming sales leader or sales organization or organization.
Right.
That's the problem I solve. The cause, if it's a larger organization, usually lack of alignment that always gets blamed, seems to always get blamed on the salespeople.
Yeah.
But if it's on an entrepreneur or small business, it still can be lack of alignment.
Yeah.
And
Very much.
well, I've just seen it time and time again where you walk in, there's lack of consistency of message. We're scripted, we're overly scripted, we're not connecting at a human level. It's a transaction, it's a mechanical versus an
Mm.
emotional and relational opportunity. And so it's less about, well, how do I just close that business versus playing the long game, like, hey, I'm in this for the long game. It doesn't matter what happens in that next meeting. What's going to look like for a year from now? And what can I do
Right.
to start to impact the relational aspect of influence?
Yeah. Dude, you're opening up a can of
You got me
worms.
fired up, Michael.
I know this is great. This is great because all right. So I'm going to throw something at you we have not talked about, and
Hmm.
I don't know if you've done any research or thinking about it at all. So if no
Hmm.
is an answer, that's great. We are in the crest, the bleeding cutting edge of AI,
Mm.
and I'm hearing more and more AI agents and AI personas and AI. And I watched a video yesterday. It's one of my clients. I went to their website and they have this video. It's an AI persona reading an AI script, and you can tell.
Yeah.
And I immediately checked out. I said, that is not good.
Yeah.
Unpack the way, because it's fast. Do you know how many videos they were able to create in an hour?
Oh, I know.
But
Yeah.
they miss the human connection and the impact that's going to make. Unpack that for us around building businesses, making connections, and being authentic.
Yeah. Well, look, it's ironic. I'm glad you asked the question too, because I read an article this morning about AI and service experience around CX. Like AI can do a lot of things, and it will evolve, and it'll become more
Oh,
personal and more intuitive and more
yep.
emotional. I have no doubt about that. It's really quite frightening what it can do.
Yeah.
But I think your sentiment is what I how I view AI in sales and the relationship side of sales. Like if it's a transaction, if it's just Amazon, for example,
Right.
all day long.
Yeah.
But if it's a more sophisticated, you mentioned you have a lot of financial advisors, for example, and
Yeah.
financial professionals that you work with and and listen to the show. How on earth is an AI going to be able to talk about my dreams and aspirations in a way that I can relate?
Right.
When I think of like the sales cycle of something that's really, really personal,
Yeah.
um, estate planning. I mean, these things are remarkably personal. And even if I'm selling a car, an AI agent can come into play. Perhaps Carvana is already showing that it can do a really effective job,
Right.
but maybe not. I just look at the more sophisticated, bigger, longer sales cycles. I just don't know.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm not opening up my mind wide enough, but sure, AI probably could do it. I don't know, man. I maybe it's the influence of my old school Indiana, growing up in a small town and watching my families buy two homes on a handshake. I just cannot imagine AI
Right.
replacing this what's referred to as soft skill.
Right.
That's really a necessary skill for people to have.
Yeah. And I'm with you. It may get there down the road, a few years down the road. I think today it's not there. And when we put that as the face of our company because it's efficient, it's
Mhm.
actually going to backfire on us today, I believe, because people want people, right? And
Mhm.
I'm a huge proponent of video. I mean, I do most of my emails that go out, they're 98% video based because
Yeah,
that's how I communicate. And it makes a difference because everybody knows I'm connecting with you.
yeah, yeah.
Changes the game.
It
So,
does, and I think the challenge that I've seen a lot too is that the self awareness around where am I really at right today in this game? How effective am I really? And
yeah,
it's more than just watching yourself on video or doing some role playing exercises and watching how you interact. It's like how present am I in that moment that matters most?
yeah,
And does that individual sitting across the desk from me feel the resonance that I'm creating? Like the genuine service-based mindset that says, this is what it's going to feel like to do business with me and my organization a year
yes.
from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. I know you have this problem. And being curious enough and having such deep curiosity to really, really, truly understand what the problem actually is, and
Mm-hmm.
then solving this solution that's multi-year, not in that moment. I'm solving your problem today. I just think there's a whole different level. And again, it's coming from sitting with, traveling with, witnessing, experience a lot of salespeople, and obviously being one my entire life myself. I think there's just a lot of self-exploratory work that needs to be done on individuals to really get themselves in a healthier mindset about, okay, what do I need to improve upon, putting that work and effort into that so that they
Yeah,
can improve the outcomes.
absolutely. All right. So let's pivot about how do you
Sure.
work with people? Who's like an ideal client? What are they going through in their mind or their business? And let's start there, and then let's talk about how do you work with people to help them transition and move out of that the 80% moving into the 20 because they become more self-aware, more confident.
Yeah, I think owners, CEOs, sales leaders, like if I look at that in terms of in an underperforming organization, that's a
Mm,
starting point for me. The feelings that they might be having, a little bit of desperation, a lot of tension. They feel and understand and see the lack of alignment in the organization. It's especially if your organization is more than 5 or 10 people, you're going to have some marketing staff, maybe a product staff, service certainly, and in this disintegrated organizations that I've seen time and time again, and how do they get all aligned? How do they all one story, many or one voice, many echoes in terms of consistency of messaging, all of that. So those are my ideal avatars. The way in which I work, one-on-one coaching, small group coaching, workshop format, or video based, depending on. I'm very accommodating to what we need. I like to be in person. I
Yeah.
think especially if it's a group, being in person is much, much better. I've gotten great outcomes in both, but again, that resonance, that energy that you'd feel, I can walk into a room, and I would encourage leaders to think about this too. You can feel the tone of the organization. I can feel the tone of the team,
Yeah.
and being aware of that helps me. So my ideal client, and then those are how we generally work is either
Awesome.
small one-on-one or one-on-one or group workshops.
Yeah. And is this, do you typically find these are 3-month engagements or the year engagements? I mean, or is there even a way to judge it? Is it so individual that there's no
It's
way to do
so
that?
individual. Yeah. I mean, so on my website, you think individuals can book a discovery call where I just kind of listen and understand the problem and then subscribe what I think would be the best thing. So, sometimes if it's around messaging, for example, and story, a 1 day intensive with a small team, I can see great results.
Yeah.
If their messaging is getting diluted in the marketplace, or they're having so many different messages and coming together, that's a relatively easy and quick fix.
Yeah.
If it's lack of alignment in an organization that involves more than just one person, that's a more
Hmm.
in-depth process that could be a yearly, quarterly type engagement.
Yeah, that's good. I also want people to hear, and we haven't said this, but culture. If you're building a firm, let's say you're a financial advisor and you're an individual guy, you just stopped knocking the doors, you hired somebody else to knock the doors. You're building your team, and you've got 4, 5, 6, 8, 8, 10, 12 people on staff. You're growing. The culture, the leadership culture, the communication has to pivot and change because your role is changing, your communication has to change. Talk about that transition of going from a 1 or 2 person shop to okay, I've got 8 people now and 8 families that are dependent on me. How do I lead into the future?
Yeah, well, this is a great question. There's a lot to unpack there. I'd say the first thing I've seen is the unwillingness to get out of the sales process and the sales cycle. I
Yeah.
spoke to a group of $82 million plus founders, CEO. They all the reason why they asked me come speak was because they were having difficulty pulling themselves out of the day to day to become the strategic visionary of the organization to help guide the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Yep.
And so we talked about things like success or sales reluctance and irrational fears as relates to a founder who needs to pull themselves out of the sales cycle. The second thing I would say around culture, culture is an interesting word for me because I come from a corporate environment. We'd always say, here's our mission and this is our vision. I would take it a step deeper as a founder that's their business is growing and multiplying.
Hmm.
Have to get really clear on what your core values are. So my 5 core values are decency, trust, performance, team first, and image of leadership. I've had those
Hmm.
core values for 10 years, but I did some work to really uncover what they were, like what was important to me. So when I took over a team, the first meeting would always be, here are my core values. These don't have to
Hmm.
be your core values, but these are going to be our core values. And so I
Hmm.
set the standard, and everybody knows that this is the rule. This is the game we're playing.
Right.
These are the expectations of what how I want people to resonate and interact and communicate. And then the third is the most important is what does your communication clarity look like? Because
Absolutely.
here's the thing, Michael. I was thinking about this the other day. I can't tell you the number of times on this phone right here, I get a text or a phone call says, "You got a minute?
Yeah.
You got a minute?" Most of the time, it's from leaders within organizations who are concerned or anxious about something that's happening around them. Call earlier this week, beautiful human being, major organizational change in his company. He's thinking he's on his way out, and through our conversation, I thought, well, no, actually, you might be in a better position than you think.
Yeah.
But that's created because of lack of clarity.
Right.
And that's just one of 20 examples in this month alone of conversations I've had because it's not clear what the expectations are, what our mandate is, where we're going, what it's going to look like. And so you align everybody, but it's communication clarity.
Yeah.
We've got to get more effective at communication clarity.
Yeah. And I love that. And so many times that comes back to core values. Who is it? Who am I? What are we really trying to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I won't even go there. But it's if we as leaders are not clear and confident,
Yes.
everything's just gonna it's just not gonna be we're gonna have misalignment. We're gonna have so many struggles. And I think the reality is, and I'd love for you to tell me if I'm off base or not. The reality is, many times I think you could probably look into an organization and probably within a really short period of time go, I see two or three things that we need to talk about
Yeah.
that the operator, the owner, probably is missing because they're busy doing other things. Does that
Yeah.
ever happen?
Oh my gosh, every time. And and here's the two things it comes back to always. Again, well, three: lack of alignment, organization is not aligned, trying to do too many things.
Yeah.
And so we send mixed messages unintentionally. So if the owner, leader, founder is still very much involved in the sales cycle, they're missing a lot of things. But the other thing they're doing is they're oftentimes sending mixed messages because you're bidding on business that doesn't make sense for you. And
Yes.
so everybody gets excited about an opportunity that gets presented to the organization, but they're like, why are we going after this business? That doesn't fit our ideal client profile or our avatar or however you define it in your organization. And so you send mixed messages unintentionally, or
Yeah.
you're holding people to different standards unintentionally. I mean, these things are just, again, that's why I say, there are a lot of great leadership books, but very, very few of them start with how much work do I need to do here
Yes.
before I try to get somebody aligned? Like, have I
Yeah.
figured out my stuff yet? And do I realize how I'm leading and the mixed messages and the lack of clarity I am giving to my team? And so again, these are all very fixable, solvable problems, but it's not an organization that I've ever gone into that doesn't have very, very similar, if not this exact same issue. So multi-billion dollar companies, entrepreneurs,
Yep.
two,
That,
3 person shops. There's so many similarities across the gamut
yeah.
that it's why I love doing what I do.
Yeah. Well, and that's why you're probably honestly really, really good at it is because of your experience, your background, and the dare I say the breadth of your view
Mhm.
from experience from who you're working with now to realize, hey, you're a 8-person law firm, but I just came out of a 500-person manufacturing company that had really similar issues, and let's talk about those because they're really the same, maybe on a different level, where the 8-person law firm would never see it,
Yeah.
right? And too many times we have that imposter syndrome. Oh, it's not me. It can't be. Or I'm broken. I can't do this. I can't. It's like, no, it's okay. Really. And we hear about it on a podcast and it sparks a thought and maybe some feelings. Then it goes away. Then we read about it in a book and it does it again. But working with you over a short period of time or a longer period of time because you've got a structured approach, you've got a human who can give you feedback and a really safe place to go, this is how I'm feeling. And Scott's going to go, I got that. I've been there. And you go, now we have a track to run on, right?
Right.
So how do I'm sure we have scratched some itches or whatever. How do people like find more about you and dive into your different programs or have one of those discovery calls and go, okay, here's what's their next step?
Yeah. So my website is www.thescottramey.com. And it's Ramey, Scott with 2 T's. So scottramey.com. And the other way, if you just want to see some of the work, my background, history, LinkedIn is a great place to go. You can
Okay.
connect with me, as we mentioned, via the website. You can do a free discovery call, no obligation. I can assure you, I'm not going to try to pitch you or close you. I can promise
Very
you
good.
that. It's not what those are
I love
intended
that.
for. And if we do a discovery call, no obligation whatsoever, I will share with you opinions in that moment based upon what you share with me. And if
Yeah,
we decide not to work together, okay,
that's great.
that's okay. I don't mind.
Yeah,
So, and there's
yeah,
some free resources on my website too that they can download and have as well.
that's awesome. And that folks comes from, dare I say, an attitude of abundance that comes from and stems from Scott has spent the time to understand who he is, and he is comfortable in his skin, and that's why he doesn't need you on the discovery sale to sell you. It just it when you get to this point in your life in your career, everything changes and it's like breaking the sound barrier. I've always heard, it's really rough until you break it. Then it's wow.
Yeah.
That's where Scott's living, and that's why you need to reach out to him. Go out, and I'll have all that stuff in the show notes. Go connect with him, find out more, and spend some time with him because this is an area of life. Not only will help your business, it'll help your life. And think back to the conversation Scott had with his daughter. the pivot, the vector change there, one conversation can make all the difference in the world. Scott, man, thank you for, well,
Man,
thanks for being my guest on
no, thank
Expertise.
you for having me. I
But
appreciate it. Yeah.
well, you're welcome. But thanks for who you are and how you just approach everything and the impact you're making in people's lives. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael.